The millionaire's baby wouldn't stop crying on the plane until a single mother did the unthinkable. Evan Brooks had planned for this flight with the obsession of a man who had learned to live in fear. For 8 months, ever since Claire, his wife, had died moments after giving birth to Lila, he had discovered that preparation was the only thin line between him and chaos. And so, before boarding the early morning flight from Denver to Portland, he had checked everything at least 3 times. The diaper bag was arranged with near military precision: wipes, spare diapers, bottles, extra clothes, a thin blanket, saline drops, teething toys. The white noise app was ready on his phone, the lullaby playlist pre-saved. He had read every article about how to keep a baby calm on a plane, watched every expert video, asked every single father in his support group. He boarded the plane like a soldier entering a mission, hoping for one thing only: that Lila would sleep peacefully. But halfway across the Wyoming sky, every plan he had crumbled. Lila began squirming in his arms, her lips trembling before releasing the first short cry, a sound Evan instantly recognized as an alarm. He gently rocked her, rubbed her back. But the cry didn't soften. It sharpened, grew louder, more desperate. Within minutes, Lila was wailing. Evan offered the bottle. She turned away. He tried the pacifier. She spit it out so hard it hit the floor. He tried singing Claire's favorite lullaby, the song he had practiced in the mirror over and over, but his voice shook, not soft enough, not confident enough. He rocked, patted, whispered, prayed. Nothing worked. Around him, stairs began to prick his skin like tiny needles. The man in the business suit 2 rows ahead huffed loudly. A woman in front exaggerated a dramatic sigh, tilting her head in annoyance. An elderly couple across the aisle exchanged that familiar look Evan had seen too many times, the look that said the mother should be here. Evan lowered his head, his heart heavy as stone. He heard the unspoken sentences, ones no one said aloud, but he knew too well. You're doing it wrong. You don't know how to take care of her. A baby needs her mother. 8 months in, and he still hadn't learned how to silence those thoughts, mostly because they lived inside him. He remembered every second of the day Claire left him. She held Lila for exactly 42 seconds before alarms went off in the delivery room, before the doctor's smile disappeared, before Evan's world shrank to 2 sentences. She's hemorrhaging. We did everything we could. And then silence. A silence that had followed him for 8 months. Now, in an airplane humming gently through the enormous sky, he felt that silence again, dry, heavy, swallowing him, while Lila cried so hard her face turned red. He looked at her, helpless, a wave of failure crashing into him. I'm trying, Lila, he whispered inside. Daddy's trying. As Lila's cries tore through the cabin air, Evan noticed the flight attendant walking down the aisle, her professional smile stiff, like something drawn with a ruler. He clutched Lila to his chest, bracing for the next blow of shame. Maybe try walking her to the back? Maybe let us help a bit? Maybe try to keep her a little quieter? He clutched Lila to his chest, bracing for the next blow of shame. But before the flight attendant could speak, something unexpected happened. A woman stood up, across the aisle, window seat, dark hair tied back hastily, eyes exhausted, as if sleep had been a stranger for days. Evan hadn't noticed her once during the flight. She didn't look at him with pity, didn't sigh, didn't judge. She simply stepped over, slipped through the narrow aisle, and held out her arms. Give her to me. Her voice was gentle but steady. Not a question, not a command, just truth. Evan froze, instinctively tightening his hold. You didn't hand your baby to a stranger, not on a plane, not now. But there was something in her voice, something that felt like she had been exactly here before, desperate, exhausted, afraid, and had survived it. In that split second of hesitation, she leaned down and lifted Lila from his arms, moving as naturally as if she did this every day. The cabin fell instantly silent, so silent Evan could hear his own heartbeat. A hush spread through the cabin like an invisible wave as the woman gathered Lila into her arms. Evan didn't have time to object, time to understand what was happening. He only felt the tension in the air soften, as though the entire plane had paused to witness what would happen next. The woman held Lila close to her chest, her hand resting on the baby's back with natural, practiced ease. She didn't look at Evan, didn't seek approval or gratitude. She simply stood there in the cramped space of the airplane aisle, closed her eyes gently, and began to hum. Not a familiar song, not a recognizable melody, just a soft, slow, low hum, like the whisper of someone who had sung through countless tired nights. A lullaby imperfect, but so honest it tightened something in Evan's throat. And then the impossible happened. Lila, who had been screaming red-faced, froze. Her crying stuttered into broken sobs. Then, as if someone flipped a switch, she went silent. The cabin quieted instantly. The businessman stopped grumbling. The sighing woman turned around, eyes wide. Even the flight attendant halted mid-step, mid-sentence. Evan stared at the woman, so stunned he forgot to breathe. Lila burrowed into her shoulder, a tiny hand curling around a loose strand of her hair as if she had found something she had been searching for. A strange emotion washed over Evan. Not jealousy, not shame, something closer to relief so deep it weakened his legs. For the first time in 3 hours, he heard himself exhale. The woman continued swaying gently, humming as if speaking directly to Lila. "Shh, shh, sweetheart. It's okay. It's okay." Her voice was low and slightly raspy, warm like sunlight after a storm. After a moment, she opened her eyes and looked at Evan. "She's just scared," she said softly. She needed arms that weren't trembling. Evan had no words, none that felt adequate, none that felt worthy. He sank back into his seat, letting out a breath he'd been holding for what felt like 8 months. The woman returned to her seat, still cradling Lila, as though she were her own child. Maya, the 4-year-old girl beside her, slept soundly, her head resting against the window. Evan studied the woman more closely now. Dark brown hair tied loosely, strands falling around her face, subtle shadows beneath her eyes, signs of sleepless nights. A simple hoodie, a worn silver ring on her finger. Everything about her said she was no stranger to exhaustion, yet she still stood up when it mattered. Someone who had lived this, someone who knew babies and fear and crying, someone who understood. Evan felt that truth deeply. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice hoarse. She didn't look at him. "No need to thank me." "I mean it," he said, clearing his throat. I really didn't know what else to do." This time she turned to him. Her brown eyes held something unusual, not panic, not judgment. Exhaustion, yes, but not the kind that breaks a person, the kind that shapes them. And beneath it, a quiet understanding Evan hadn't seen from anyone in 8 long months. "No one knows what to do," she said. "No one starts out good at this. No one?" A moment of silence passed between them, not an empty silence, one that felt like a pause the world granted him to breathe. She looked down at Lila. "What's her name?" "Lila," he answered. "Lila," she repeated softly. "Beautiful name." Evan pressed his lips together and nodded. She shifted slightly, creating room between their seats. "Would you like to sit here for a bit, so she can feel both of you?" Evan hesitated, not from fear, but because this moment felt too gentle, too calming, too different from everything he'd known these past months. He wasn't sure he deserved such relief. But Lila stirred and let out that tiny, familiar sigh, the one Evan called her "I'm okay" sound. He stood and moved into the seat beside them. That simple shift, quiet, warm, became the first open door to everything that would follow. When Evan moved into the seat beside her, the woman adjusted her posture, pulling a thin blanket halfway over Lila as if she were used to settling a sleeping child in her arms. The ease of her movements drew Evan's attention, like watching a musician handle an instrument they'd played all their life. The space around them seemed to shrink. The plane still hummed beneath their feet. The engines still droned, yet their row felt strangely separate from the usual chaos of a crowded flight. A peaceful silence stretched between them, delicate enough that Evan feared breaking it. She was the one to speak first. "She's asleep now." Evan looked down. Indeed, Lila had fallen into a deep sleep, her lips slightly parted, her hand loosely gripping the fabric of the woman's hoodie. Her tiny breaths were soft and steady. "Thank you," he said again, clearer this time. She smiled gently, the smile of someone tired but sincere. "You don't need to thank me. I just understand that feeling." Evan tilted his head. "Feeling what?" She stared straight ahead for a moment, as if deciding whether to open a long-closed door inside herself. "The feeling of being a parent and not knowing if you're doing anything right," she whispered. "The feeling that everyone around you is watching, waiting for you to fail, even when you're trying your absolute best." Evan's hands curled together. He hadn't expected anyone to say it so precisely. She continued, her voice low but steady. "I used to think I was the worst mother in the world. Maya, my daughter, cried non-stop for months. I barely slept. Every time I stepped outside, I felt like every set of eyes was judging me." She paused to swallow. "And then, I learned no one really knows. No one starts out knowing what they're doing. We just figure it out as we go." Evan studied her. Something in her tone, a deep crack that never quite broke, told him she was speaking from lived experience. "I guess I'm still figuring it out," he said. "We all are." Silence returned, but now it felt warm, like a small shelter in the sky. Evan glanced at the child sleeping by the window. "What's her name?" "Maya," she said. 4.5. Yesterday she told me she could count to 83, but I'm not entirely convinced." Evan chuckled softly. "Sounds adorable." "Yeah." She looked at Maya with the kind of tenderness found only in mothers who had survived long, sleepless nights. "She's everything to me." Evan was about to respond when he noticed her hand tremble slightly. A flicker of sorrow passed through her eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer at first, then she exhaled as though releasing a breath she'd held too long. "My mother died last week." Evan straightened. "She was the only person who helped me when I became a single mom. She moved in with me, cooked, watched Maya while I worked, held me when I cried at 2 in the morning. I don't know how I would have survived without her." A familiar ache tightened Evan's chest, a shared kind of grief. "She just said she felt tired one morning," the woman continued. "That was it. And by evening—" Her voice faltered. Her heart stopped. No warning, no goodbye. Evan breathed in sharply. Her story felt painfully close to his own. "I'm really sorry," he said, and for the first time in months, the words didn't feel empty. She nodded softly, eyes lowered. "We're flying back from the funeral. I haven't had time to breathe. It's only been a week, and everything still feels so heavy." Evan wanted to place a hand on her shoulder, but wasn't sure if it would be too intimate. So he said gently, "I know what a loss like that feels like. I lost Claire in the delivery room. I didn't get to say anything either." This time she turned and looked straight at him. Their gazes met, two wounds recognizing each other. No explanation needed. In that moment, on a plane full of strangers, A single father and a single mother stopped being strangers. The flight drifted on in a strange, quiet peace that neither Evan nor the woman, who had finally told him her name was Sienna, dared to break. Lila slept soundly in her arms, and Maya, still curled up by the window, occasionally shifted, but didn't wake. Then the plane's speakers crackled to life, and the captain's steady voice announced their descent into Portland. The sound felt like a gentle tap, pulling them out of the intimate, unexpectedly deep space their conversation had created. Sienna shifted slightly, securing Lila as the plane shuddered through its descent. Evan reached out to support the baby's lower back, and when his fingers brushed Sienna's hand, light, fleeting, it still sent a jolt through him. When the wheels touched the runway with a soft jolt, Maya stirred awake, rubbing her eyes in confusion. Then she saw Lila in her mother's arms and sat upright immediately. "Mom, is the baby awake yet?" she asked, voice thick with sleep. "Not yet, sweetheart," Sienna whispered. Maya blinked around and then finally seemed to register Evan. "Oh, you've been sitting next to us for a long time?" Evan chuckled. "Yeah, a little while." Something softened inside him at the pure innocence in her tone. When the plane came to a full stop and the seatbelt sign clicked off, passengers rose, pulling bags from overhead bins, jostling for space in the aisle. Yet somehow that frantic movement didn't reach the small, quiet pocket where they were standing. Evan gently took Lila back into his arms. She nestled against his chest, still half asleep. "Thank you for everything," he said, the sincerity unmistakable. Sienna nodded, a flicker of shyness crossing her eyes. "It's nothing, really. I just did what I wish someone had done for me when Maya was little." She began gathering her things, tucking the stuffed bunny into Maya's small backpack. Evan felt the moment slipping, felt something fragile inside him dip as if he were losing something important. But then Sienna hesitated. She pulled out a small scrap of paper, wrote something quickly, folded it, and handed it to him. "This is where I work, the Lantern House Cafe, on Alder Street." Her voice was soft but steady. "If you ever need a quiet place to sit, or just want to talk." Evan looked at the paper as if it were the most delicate and precious thing he'd ever been given. "Thank you," he murmured. "Truly." Sienna smiled, this time sadder but warmer too. "No pressure. I know what your life looks like." Maya tugged at her sleeve, peering at Lila. "Mommy, will we see the baby again?" Sienna looked at her daughter, then at Evan. "Well, that depends on life," she said gently. Evan didn't know if his heart was ready for this, but he heard himself say, "I hope we do." The drive from the Portland airport back to his small apartment felt wrapped in a thin fog. Not because Evan was tired, though he was exhausted, but because his mind was still on that plane, on the moment Sienna handed him the folded slip of paper, on the look in her eyes when she told him, "No pressure." The lack of pressure was exactly what made him think about her even more. During the first days after the flight, Evan kept the slip with the Lantern House Cafe's address in his wallet, tucked into its own careful compartment. Each time he opened his wallet, he checked to make sure it was still there. He didn't know why he did this, only that it made him feel like he was holding on to something fragile he didn't want to lose. Life fell back into its familiar rhythm. Evan returned to his job at the engineering office. He dropped Lila at daycare every morning, picked her up in the afternoon, cooked, bathed her, read to her, put her to sleep. Task after task, repeated with the precision of a routine he could perform half awake. He became better at everything, faster, steadier, yet the silence in the apartment grew heavier with each passing week. But at night, when the dishes were drying on the rack and the apartment settled into its too quiet stillness, loneliness curled beside him like a shadow he could never outrun. Because when someone has lived with grief long enough, they learn to tuck it into the smallest spaces. Quiet evenings, sinks full of dishes, the moments walking into a home that feels too big for just two people. Every night, once Lila was asleep, Evan sat alone in the living room, the warm light falling across the framed photos of Claire. He often reached out to touch the picture where she was laughing, the laugh he fell in love with the first time they met. And though he knew life had to move forward, every glimpse of her smile tightened something inside him. Claire, am I doing this right? He whispered it often, knowing no answer would come. Lila grew quickly. She crawled, then pulled herself up, then toddled with unsteady steps that made Evan both proud and painfully wistful for Claire. She babbled, "Da-da," tugged at his shirt, laughed in her sleep, and on certain nights she sat in her crib, humming a wavering little tune, clutching her stuffed bunny. The same melody Sienna had hummed on the plane. Evan recognized it immediately. A memory Lila refused to let go of, no matter how much time passed. As spring shifted toward early summer, life softened in small ways, but the hard nights still returned. On those nights, Lila cried without reason, her little body tense with some emotion she couldn't name. Evan walked her through the dimly lit apartment, whispering lullabies that felt too heavy, too fragile. There were moments he thought he might collapse, whispering, "I'm sorry, Lila. Daddy's trying," with a voice barely holding together. And always, without fail, the image of Sienna rose in his mind, standing steady in the airplane aisle, exhausted but unwavering, holding Lila like she had known her forever. A stranger who, in 20 minutes, understood his daughter better than he did in hours of desperate attempts. That memory never loosened its grip. One morning, 8 months after the flight, Evan found himself on Alder Street again after dropping Lila at daycare. He hadn't planned to stop. He only meant to glance at the cafe, the way he had dozens of times before. But this time his foot lifted off the gas and the car drifted to a smooth stop along the opposite sidewalk. The yellow awning rippled in the breeze. The paper lanterns swayed gently, tapping against each other like chimes. Inside, warm morning light spilled across the wooden tables, softening the entire room into something that looked almost unreal. And then he saw her. Behind the counter, leaning slightly toward a customer, hair tied neatly back, a glimmer of a smile on her face. Sienna? Even from a distance he knew. There was no mistaking her. Evan placed one hand on the steering wheel, the other drifting toward his wallet, as if confirming the slip of paper was still where it belonged. In that moment, he understood something he had tried to ignore. We can run from many things, but not from the truths that wait patiently inside us. A breeze stirred the lanterns again, tapping them together softly, like a reminder. Evan inhaled deeply, and for the first time in 8 months, he realized he was truly afraid, not of failing, but of the possibility that life might open in a direction he had not dared to imagine. That morning, after sitting in his car for far too long on Alder Street, Evan eventually drove away. He told himself it wasn't the right time, that another day, another chance, would come when he felt braver. But throughout the entire workday, his mind drifted like a lake, disturbed by a single thrown stone. Every meeting, every email, every conversation felt distant, and that evening, when he lifted Lila from her car seat, he noticed his hands trembling, a nervous, fragile tremble that felt like he'd lost something important he had never truly possessed. In the days that followed, the thought of stepping into the Lantern House Cafe clung to him strangely. He didn't speak of it, not to anyone, not even to himself. But it hovered in his mind like a piece of music stuck on repeat. Each time he drove past Alder Street, he slowed down, paused, then kept going. One morning, he even reached for the door handle, but Lila cried out, "Da-da!" from the back seat, startling him back into hesitation. But then Lila's first birthday arrived. Evan woke before dawn. Pale morning light slipped through the curtains in a gentle glow. Lila stood in her crib, hands gripping the railing, smiling at him with the smile that weakened him every time. When Evan lifted her, she hummed that familiar melody, Sienna's lullaby. And suddenly, 8 months of doubt dissolved like fog on glass. He bathed her, dressed her in a tiny yellow dress sent by Claire's mother, slipped on her little walking shoes, brushed her soft hair, and paused to look at her, really look at her, memorizing the moment. "Where do you want to go today, birthday girl?" he asked, knowing she wouldn't understand. Lila frowned in thought, then said her favorite word. "Mo?" He laughed. "More means something new, I guess." And so he buckled her into the car seat and drove straight to Alder Street. No detours, no hesitation, no circling the block. When he parked in front of the cafe, his heart pounded so hard he pressed a hand to his chest to steady himself. Before him, the Lantern House Cafe looked exactly as he remembered. Soft yellow awning, paper lanterns swaying, the faint smell of fresh bread drifting from the doorway whenever someone walked out. Morning light spilled across the front windows, making the inside glow like a painting he had admired from a distance for far too long. Evan lifted Lila from the car and stood at the entrance for a moment. She nestled her head into his shoulder, her tiny fingers gripping his shirt as if encouraging him. "All right, sweetheart," he whispered. "Just once. Let's try." He pushed the door open. The bell above it chimed, clear, bright, like the beginning of something, and the warm scent of coffee, fresh loaves, and sunlit wood washed over him, pulling him into a world he had feared and longed for in equal measure. The moment Evan stepped into the cafe, the low hum of conversation and the grinding of the espresso machine seemed to fade. Not because the place was quiet, but because every sense he had narrowed into one single point, the instant he saw Sienna. She stood behind the counter, leaning forward as she handed a cup of coffee to an elderly customer. The morning light warmed her cheek, catching the loose strands of brown hair falling over her forehead, outlining her face like the soft strokes of an oil painting. Evan didn't realize he was holding his breath until she turned her head, almost by accident, toward the door. Their eyes met for a brief, impossible second. Then her eyes widened, first with surprise, then with something that looked startlingly like relief. She froze, the milk-frothing pitcher suspended midair. And before Evan could move, a small voice shrieked from across the cafe. "Mommy! Mommy! The plane! The plane!" Evan looked down just in time to see Maya leap from her little table, her coloring pencil still in hand, rushing toward him like she'd just spotted a miracle. She skidded to a stop directly in front of him, staring up with huge, breathless eyes. "You're the airplane man, and that's baby Lila, right? I remember," she announced in one excited rush. Lila made a soft noise in Evan's arms as if greeting her. Maya grinned, bright as the lanterns above them. "She's bigger now. Can she stand yet?" Evan laughed, the tightness in his chest loosening a little. "Yeah, she can. She can even run, mostly when I'm not ready for it." The small burst of laughter drew a few glances from nearby tables, but Evan didn't notice, because by then Sienna had left the counter. She wasn't rushing toward him, wasn't running dramatically, but each step she took sent his heartbeat racing. When she stopped in front of him, only a breath away, her voice trembled at the edges. "You actually came." Evan tried to speak, but 8 months of emotions had risen like a tide in his throat. "I came," he finally managed, barely above a whisper. "I almost turned the car around a dozen times, but then—" He looked at Lila. She kept humming that lullaby every night. Sienna lifted her hand to her mouth, stifling a sharp inhale. Tears gathered instantly. "That lullaby, my mom used to sing it to me. I didn't realize I sang it to her for that long on the plane." "She remembered," Evan said softly. "And so did I." A gentle silence settled between them, not awkward, not heavy, just the kind of pause the world gives when something true is unfolding. Lila looked at Sienna and reached out. "Ma," Evan panicked, shaking his head quickly. "No, sweetheart, not—" But Sienna was already stepping closer, arms opening with a tenderness that made Evan's chest ache. She took Lila effortlessly, holding her as though the little girl had always been meant to rest there. Her eyes met Evan's over the top of Lila's head. "It's okay," she whispered, voice trembling but warm. "Children sometimes know things before we do." Maya tugged her mother's dress, nodding emphatically. "I told you, the baby likes Mommy." Sienna laughed through her tears. Evan did too, a laugh soft and strange, like something inside him had finally been unlatched. "I've thought about this day for 8 months," Evan said quietly. "But I never thought it would feel real." "I have too," Sienna answered, her gaze still tender on Lila. "I was afraid that if I dreamed about it too much, it would disappear." "And now?" Evan asked. Sienna lifted her eyes to his. "Now, it's standing right in front of me." While Sienna was still holding Lila, Maya scurried back to her little art table, then returned to tug on Evan's hand as if she were guiding a very important guest. "Come here, I want to show you something." She held up a page filled with scribbles and bright splashes of color, a drawing of 4 stick figures holding hands under a sky full of dots that looked like snow but could have been anything Maya imagined. "This is me and the baby," she said, pointing to the 2 tiny figures. "And this is Mommy. And this one—" She looked at Evan, then carefully tapped her green pencil on the last figure. "This is you, because you're already in the picture." Evan froze. Something soft brushed across his heart. Gentle, dangerous, the kind of feeling that could undo him if he wasn't careful. Sienna walked closer, still cradling Lila, as naturally as if the baby had always belonged there. She looked at Maya's drawing, then at her daughter, then finally at Evan. "She really likes you," she said quietly, warmth threading through her voice. Evan smiled, though there was a hint of shyness in it. "She's adorable." "No," Sienna shook her head slightly. "I mean, she rarely adds people into her drawings. It's always just her and me." She paused gently. "And my mom." The last words shifted the air around them, like a soft wind brushing through. Evan looked at the drawing again, his fingertip tracing the corner of the paper. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "You don't have to," Sienna replied. "This is enough." Across the room, Maya placed the drawing on the table and waved at Lila. "Baby, come draw with me." Lila let out a tiny laugh, and Sienna set her down. The 2 little girls sat beside each other, their heads nearly touching, holding colored pencils as if they were holding the whole world. Evan and Sienna stood close, so close their hands weren't touching, but one breath would have been enough. While Maya and Lila sank into their colorful universe of pencils and laughter, Sienna motioned gently for Evan to follow her. She led him toward the back corner of the cafe, where an old wooden table sat beside a large window. Morning light streamed through the glass, bathing the table in a warm golden hue, the color of memory. "This," Sienna said, resting her hand on the tabletop, "is where my mom sat, every morning for 20 years. Evan looked at the table. It wasn't elegant or polished. The edges were worn, a small crack marked one of the legs, and the surface had faded with age. But its plainness made it feel sacred, as if every imperfection held a day, a morning, a quiet moment Margaret had once left behind. Sienna slid into the chair, her hand still on the wood as though touching her mother's. She sat right here every morning, 1 cup of tea, One crossword, 1 hour of peace. She smiled, a fragile smile threaded with longing. Tom, our cafe's owner, kept this table reserved for her, even after she passed. As if summoned by thought, Tom Reyes approached from behind the counter. An elderly man with a soft grin and silver hair, he set 2 cups of coffee and 2 large muffins on the table. "Hello there," Tom said, looking at Evan with a knowing warmth. "I've heard a lot about you from Sienna." He glanced at her, then back at Evan. "Seeing you walk in today, well, I imagine her mother would be quite pleased." Sienna lowered her head slightly, swallowing the emotion rising in her chest. Evan felt something tighten in his throat. He had never met Margaret, yet in the atmosphere of the cafe, he felt her presence, gentle, but undeniably real. Tom patted Sienna's shoulder before stepping away. "Take your time. It's her break after all." Then he left, giving them the quiet they didn't know they needed. After a soft pause, Sienna spoke, her voice mellow like the tea she described. "My mom used to say that. Some people show up exactly when we need them, even if we never call." Evan looked at her. "Do you think I'm one of those people?" Sienna lifted her gaze, her brown eyes carrying a tender sadness. "I'm not sure," she admitted, "but ever since that flight, I haven't been able to believe it was just coincidence." Evan glanced toward the children across the room, Maya and Lila giggling, their heads close together, drowning in colors and innocence. He took a slow breath. "I think so too." And in that gentle light, at the table washed with Margaret's memories, with 2 steaming cups of coffee between them, something shifted, subtle, but enough for Evan to know he had stepped into a place he never thought he'd be brave enough to enter. After a moment, the bubbling laughter of the 2 children broke the warm quiet between Evan and Sienna. Lila leaned into Maya, trying to mimic the older girl's scribbles. Occasionally, she pressed too hard, prompting Maya to squeal and laugh before showing her how to hold the crayon properly. The scene was so gentle, so whole, that Evan had to look away for a second just to steady the sudden ache in his chest. "They get along really well," he said softly, unable to hide the tenderness in his voice. Sienna watched their daughters, and a smile bloomed on her lips, one Evan had never seen before, one untouched by grief or weariness. "Maya hasn't warmed up to anyone this quickly," she said. "She's been closed off since Mom died. But today," she exhaled, "I haven't seen her laugh like that in months." A warmth spread through Evan's chest, followed by a flicker of fear. "I'm glad Lila can give her something good, but I don't want—" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "I don't want to become someone you and Maya expect too much from." Sienna understood instantly. She tilted her head, offering a quiet, grounding smile. "Evan, I'm not asking you for anything big. None of us are asking you to become a miracle." She nodded toward Maya's drawing. "Just be here. Sometimes that's enough." Evan met her eyes and found a sincerity so deep that it left no space to retreat. "I want to see you again," he said before he could stop himself. "Not just because of the kids, not just because of the plane, but because—" He paused, wondering if he should say more. But her eyes weren't demanding perfection, only truth. "Because I missed you. I've missed you for 8 months. Sienna inhaled softly, as if the words had brushed against a place she kept hidden. "I missed you too," she whispered, steady but fragile. "I was just afraid to say it, because if I said it then, it would feel too real." Silence settled again, but it wasn't empty. It was full, of acknowledgement, of possibility. Then Sienna straightened slightly, as if making a deliberate choice. "Evan, I'm here every morning, Monday through Friday, 7 to 10. She lifted her gaze. If you want to come, not a date, no pressure. Just sit together, a cup of coffee, 2 kids playing. Something inside Evan, light as breath, strong as a heartbeat, broke open. I want to, he said instantly. I want to come. Across the room, Maya shouted, Mommy, look, the baby colored on my skirt. Lila laughed loudly, tilting her head toward Evan as if waiting for his reaction. Evan burst out laughing, a real laugh, unguarded and free. Sienna watched him with that new soft smile, the light from the window warming her face, making the moment almost unreal in its gentleness. Evan knew then that he had stepped into something, not love all at once, but a beginning, a beautiful, delicate, hopeful beginning.